everyone. Welcome to HR Tech Talks. I'm Ben Eubanks, your host. I'm so glad to have you here with us. Looking forward to another fun conversation, diving into these topics that all of us care deeply about. And today is definitely no exception. You can't turn around today without hearing or seeing someone looking for work, looking for employees, all the job postings, all the employer brand stuff coming to the forefront, kind of an interesting conversation. And so today we're going to dive into some aspects of that and how video plays into that bigger equation. Really looking forward to this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and I was just chatting with a guest before we started about how much fun and just anyway, I'll stop chatting because I'm just pumped up and fired up about this. So I'm going to quit doing that and just go ahead and welcome Matt Baxter here from Wedge to talk to us today. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here, Ben.
Absolutely. Before we dive into some of the fun stuff we've got planned, would you take a minute and let the audience know a little more about who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt Baxter, live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, CEO of a company called Wedge HR, which we'll dive into. Lived in Michigan area my whole life, but yeah, love HR tech. My first business was in landscaping and lawn care, then dove into HR tech. So not a typical path, but I've fallen in love with the space, been in it for about 6 years now. So it's been a blast. So excited to be here.
Awesome. That is a fun transition. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, not necessarily a linear path, but it's a good one.
Oh gosh. Well, of all of the professions in the world, it feels like recruiting HR is the one where more people say they fell into it than anything else. So I don't think it's a far cry to say, hey, you fell into the HR tech side of things from some other space. So I kind of teed it up a little bit. We're going to talk about hiring and what's happening there and the big challenges and things like that. And I'd love to hear from you because you get a chance from your unique perspective to talk to a lot of clients, a lot of customers and prospects and just leaders in the space. And you have a unique lens on things. What are you seeing and hearing as some of the big priorities right now?
Yeah, so obviously you can't really give a talk without mentioning COVID. COVID changed everything, right? So what we see in a couple different ways, I think it's obvious to come out and say, I think companies are struggling to find talent, right? Everybody wants people. So that's a very obvious statement. Everybody wants to find good people, good talent. I think candidate flow is really interesting right now. It feels like everybody has job postings and there's a lot of idle candidates actually not always applying. And there's kind of this gap of we can't find people. And how do we get more candidates to apply? I also think there's a huge conversation around, and maybe this is podcast 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but there's a whole conversation around sort of employee branding in the hiring process that I think COVID sort of forced the hand to get companies to say, okay, job descriptions are no longer a way to attract talent anymore. How do we add video to the ad? Do we have personal brand of employee? I mean, there's a whole different slew, but I think kind of the big topics that we're seeing is companies are struggling to find candidates, struggling to keep that sort of top of funnel filled, and get candidates throughout the pipeline process. So we're definitely seeing that as one of the number one priorities.
Let's be honest, Matt. Were job descriptions ever really a great way to attract candidates?
I'm trying to be politically correct. Like I've only been in the space 6 years. Maybe a decade ago they were exciting, but they aren't now. That's for sure.
They have, from my time recruiting 10 years ago, they were not exciting then, and I don't think they've gotten.
Nothing's changed.
I'll say the standard job description, right, is and job postings and things that are as they always have been. Yeah. But there are ways now, like you were saying, weaving video in, looking for just unique ways to position that. I was talking to a leader recently in they're in food service, and I said, you know what? I've realized looking at your store, your business here, your employer brand is like this far below your brand as a company because everywhere I turn, someone's coming over here to get food. They see the apply button. They're on your marquee. You've got, hey, we've got 2 for $5, and here's our short.
Yeah, it's not even selling products. It's please apply for my job. I don't really even care to show discounts.
Don't buy a sandwich. Just come and make sandwiches, please, or whatever it is. We're seeing that as a priority. And one of the things that I'm curious about, you mentioned video a minute ago. I know that's what you do. So I want to give you a chance to talk about your sweet spot. And once you do that, I'm going to throw some research at you. You and I traded emails like months ago, feels like an age ago. And I told you at some point I'd tell you about it. So you didn't expect it to be live here in front of everybody else. But I'll share some of the research that we have on video with you. But I'd love to hear from you how you're seeing that play into this, because you used a phrase a minute ago that I haven't heard before. You said idle candidates, right? Can we use video to turn them from an idle candidate to an active candidate? Is that possible? And talk about some of those things.
Yeah. So when COVID first happened, let's say March 2020, there were sort of 3 reactions that we saw. There was we have no idea what's about to happen, so we're going to lay off our workforce. There was we're not sure what's going to happen, but we're in a good cash position. Let's, not hire, but kind of freeze hiring. And then there was the immediate, were going gangbusters, hiring like crazy. So it was supply chain, logistics, nursing homes, grocery stores. Those were all hiring like crazy. Then obviously, as the economy's sort of started to come back, we're not totally out of the woods, but say things are starting to come back, we're seeing companies now totally reinvent their hiring process altogether. Some of that includes video. Some of that includes we're now shopping for different HR tech products like applicant tracking systems, like assessment providers. I think all in all, the last 24 months has been a surge in sort of HR tech investment. Obviously, we're in the video space. Everything shifted from no video to now everybody uses, and their grandma uses Zoom, right? So we've definitely seen that to be true in the early stage of the hiring process. And specifically in our business, we're an asynchronous video interview provider. So we're one way. So different than Zoom, we're not live. And we see that actually here to stay, and here to stay actually really strong, because I think there's a lot of companies saying, oh, sort of that first interview, we don't necessarily need to fly a candidate across the country to get that sort of that gist of who they are, kind of the early stage hiring, process that we go through. We don't need to phone screen every single candidate. And so in our space, in the video screening space, we've seen that not only grow with COVID, but continue just to surge like crazy. And I think obviously video in a lot of different ways is here to stay. Obviously, I'm here in Vegas right now in person. It's good to see people in person. We want to get back to that as much as possible. But I think in general, there's going to be a lot of use cases for video that COVID sort of forced the hand for that to be kind of a staple in all that we're doing.
What's interesting, we did some research at some point in the past, and one of the things that I came away with, we actually surveyed candidates, because I kept hearing, candidates don't like video, they don't like, assessments and other hurdles in the hiring process, they don't enjoy that. And I was curious because I didn't mind it as a candidate, and so I did this research and asked a lot of people who've been looking for and applying for jobs, how do you feel about that? And what I found in there, just like the joke we made about job descriptions a minute ago, they're like, yeah, the resume is okay, but I have to do that because they asked for it. I'd actually prefer a way to tell you more about myself and show off what I can do, because the more chance I have to really explore my capabilities, to say, hey, here's what I'm really good at. That allows you to pick me based on those things, not based on how well crafted and formatted my resume was, or whether I gave it on that really nice and fancy paper, all those years ago. I'm dating myself a little bit.
Ben,
those things don't matter.
As you are, will you please put into all of your life into one single sheet of paper, and we're going to judge you on that piece of paper? Really?
Yes.
That's what we're doing here. So I get it. I'm with it, and that's what we saw too. I mean, I think there's obviously things like you've got. I think there was a lot of early stage video interview companies where candidates didn't like it because the product was super clunky. So if it takes a long time, you got to download an app, you got to do all these different things. Of course, that's a terrible experience. And that's why we've actually seen, sort of, to totally agree with your point, we see candidates loving the experience, because it's like, allow them to have retakes, make it be a little bit softer experience, let them do a practice question. All these, there's some very small sort of low hanging fruit things you can do to make it an experience. The candidates are like, this is actually the first time I ever felt heard in the early stages of the hiring process, which, flip side of that, you got companies saying, we'd like our hiring process to be about empathy, yet submit your resume and we're not going to respond if it doesn't.
Into the grinder you go.
Yeah, exactly. So 100%, we're on the same page.
So we talked about this. You just touched on the employer side there at the very end. We talked about candidates and how they appreciate this. What do employers say when they pick up Wedge for the first time, or they start using that and putting their candidates through it? They're like, are they faster? Are they hiring better quality? Like, what sort of metrics are they looking for, outcomes, to prove that, besides just, okay, we're not flying someone across the US for this interview or across the world, but they're also probably getting some other outcomes and benefits from that, I would imagine.
Yeah. So our biggest kind of staple of a sales pitch is, let's help you reduce your time to fill. So obviously finding candidates is difficult now. So if you got one that you really, really like, you want to get them hired as quickly as possible. And so, for example, we did a case study with some manufacturing companies that their average time to fill was 60 days. And by sort of isolating, obviously there's a few other variables to it, but by using Wedge, we went from 60 days to 32 days on that time to fill for that position. So nearly cutting your time in half. Now you can ask the question, where are you saving so much time? Majority of time spent in the early stages of hiring is sort of that initial, I've got 50 applications, 50 resumes, vetting that, scheduling that entry-level phone screen of, let's say out of 50, you like 15. You got to do a 30-minute phone screen with 15 of them. Half of them aren't going to show up. Half of them in the first 30 seconds are going to know it's not going to be a good fit. And you've got one or two that might be the diamond in the rough. And you spent 15 times 30 times scheduling, all to find that one or two you want to interview. Whereas why don't we go ask 30 of them to do a 5-minute long video? You can watch 35-minute long videos in the time that you could phone screen 3 candidates. We're not even saying get rid of the phone screen, but at least the ones that you're phone screening are candidates that already have a little vested interest in the process. You already know a little bit more about them, so that by the time you're actually on a live or synchronous or in person, you know way more about the candidate, and the candidate knows a lot more about the company too. So that's where we see sort of that time to save mechanism being huge in the early stages.
I've never thought about it this way, but there's a concept in the learning space. Hang with me. I'm coming back. There's a concept in the learning space.
I was never a good student, so you're making me a little sweaty. So come on, man.
Flipped classroom, where instead of saying we all show up here and then I'll give you the information and then we'll talk about it, we're using a lot of our time to present that information. A flipped classroom says you're going to show up already having read that, so we can discuss it and make more use of this time together. And that's kind of what you're talking about here, actually. When you come together with those candidates that you are really interested in and that are interested in you, that have already completed this process, you've already gotten some of those other niceties out of the way, and you can dive into, let's really look at how you do this. Let's look at, do your behaviors align with the kind of behaviors we want to have in this organization? Let's look at your technical competencies, like whatever else. You've gotten past those other things that to drag your time down, and you focus on the stuff you actually want to prioritize, which is intriguing. I've never stopped to think about it that way.
Well, I mean, to that point, you're kind of eliminating the risk of the surprise, right? So, you look fantastic on paper. You bring that person in for an interview and you realize these things don't line up, or maybe they fluff things up or whatever it may be. You're kind of eliminating that major surprise that doesn't need to be there. And I'm not trying to get rid of the resume, not trying to get rid of that phone screen or whatever you may do, although I think there's compelling reasons we should lessen both of those things. However, it's kind of getting rid of that sort of initial, like, man, person looked great on paper, brought him in, this is just not going to be a good fit. Or they didn't even show up. Candidate ghosting is like, I think I just read a stat that it's like one in 3 applications right now result in a candidate ghosting entirely, which, 2/3 of your interviews are going to be successful. Just the interview, not even successful hires. So anyways, I think there's a lot of fat in that whole process that we can trim down.
When you think about, when I hear ghosting, we always think about someone who's going to be, a cashier at a restaurant or something like that, something very basic. But I've heard about it from friends in education, like teachers aren't showing up, and like these are professional positions and it's pretty wild to see some of those kinds of things, and just eliminating, again, some of the overhead, some of the extra time, some of the extra effort we're spending in that process. You call trim the fat. I kind of like that. That's a really intriguing way of looking at it. And again, going back to that research piece I mentioned earlier, the candidates actually appreciate the chance to say, hey, I'm Ben, and here's what I can do. Judge me based on that. Judge me based on how I can respond to these questions and what I can show you in that, not just based on, as you said, this sheet of paper. Goodness. I want to ask like 50 other questions.
I was about to say, it sounds like we need a whiskey, a cigar, and another 3 hours of a podcast. So,
well, for the people out there, I was going to ask a question a minute ago. For the people listening in out there, I'm kind of curious if you've ever seen what Matt just mentioned, because I know I have, and I make light of it when I'm speaking from the stage. But if you've seen, like, this resume looks great, the person comes in and suddenly they're not who you thought they were. Maybe they're great technically, but they don't have any of the people skills we need in order for them to actually do their job. Or maybe they inflated their stuff a little bit, or whatever else. So if you have seen that experience, go ahead and chime in the chat now, because I'd just be curious to see those stories and probably to commiserate together, all of us, because we've probably all seen some version of that. And as Matt is saying, this allows us to get over some of those things and find out early on, wow, we asked them to give us 30 seconds on this, and they're still talking 4 minutes later on, the year was 1997, and okay, maybe that's not the best fit for this role. So I do have an interview story like that. I'll tell you sometime.
Well, can I give you real quick on that, another flip example that I think people are finding really interesting. So we're starting to work with quite a few franchises and obviously some middle market manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they're actually doing is they're actually somewhat eliminating that first interview, live, like in-person interview, because you think about a lot of roles of like a cashier, to have them formally have to put a suit and tie on, come in for an interview, make it a very high pressure scenario. It's not indicative of the job at all. So like we work with some trucking companies that said, we're going to get rid of the interview process entirely and have them use the resume, make sure they have like their, the CDL. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Make sure they have their CDL, which is great. And then I'll like have them do a wedge where, okay, you get to know the person a little bit, but why have a trucker have to go through a formal interview, which has nothing to do with the job? So we're actually seeing that the flip side of that as well too, which has been fascinating. So little tidbit that we're seeing, which is cool.
It's really almost a tryout for the job, essentially,
Exactly.
like talk to me about the technical stuff. But it unfortunately, the interview, many times a person is selected from a group of interviewees based on how well they can chat, how well they can converse with you. And that's usually not a predictor of success in the job. And yet it's what we fall back on because it's comfortable, because it's easy. And so I've definitely seen that. I've heard some wild stories about more companies automating early parts of that because they said, you know what, we looked at all of our data and we said, for those people we spent all the time interviewing and doing all these things in person, there was no difference in how long they stayed, how well they performed, all those kinds of things. So why would we waste money and time doing that? Let's do something automated, do something faster, and allow them to get to work quicker because it's a hassle for them too.
That's spot on. Yep. I could not agree more.
So again, we could talk about all these different kinds of things. What is most exciting for you thinking about kind of what's next, what's coming? Because you're at the leading edge of this. You just gave us an example of how some industries, some types of jobs are saying, hey, we're going to throw away everything we've always done because we realized it really isn't working today. What other things are you seeing that you're interested in or really excited about that will probably be interesting for the audience too?
So 3, 4, 5 years ago, when we first sort of had this product as let's call it beta, idea on a napkin, and then somewhat of a product, pre-COVID, I walked in as a young tech CEO. Of course, nobody wanted to talk to me, to HR departments and tried to sell them on the, hey, let me make your life better. I know more than you do. You should use video. And of course, nobody wanted to talk to me. Of course, we didn't close any deals, right? So there's certainly the educational process of here's how video works in the hiring process. And everybody said the same thing. This is the way of the future. This is just not that big of a problem now. COVID happens, then everything shifts towards video, right? So it was like the greatest sales pitch of all time because we no longer had to convince people the power of video. It was more kind of coming alongside as a consultant to say, here's some different areas, not just our product, but different areas you can use video, whether it's video job pitches for marketing your position, like we talked about the job descriptions, whether it's a candidate marketing themselves, whether it's using it asynchronous to use for screening, all these different things. And so what I'm most excited about is that we've sort of adopted now video's here to stay. And so now how do we grow as an organization, as an entity in this and help a lot of companies? And so I think you asked kind of target market. We've really started to grow in sort of the franchise world, the SMB, sort of the mid-market, business quite a bit. We've definitely stepped a little bit into enterprise too, but it's a blue ocean of a lot of companies saying, we want to use video. We don't know how. Kind of walk us through and help us. And that's been just a blast. And it's been fun to grow that way too.
So we've talked a lot about the asynchronous stuff, but you mentioned some other examples and use cases there. Will you go back to those? Because I want to make sure that we plumb the depths a little bit there, because I completely forgot, honestly, about those other capabilities. And I don't want to, because I think that, again, everybody that's listening to this knows what a video interview is, but think about other areas to apply video into the process to make it more personal, to make it more human, to make it, again, to hopefully turn someone from an idle candidate into an active candidate and get them off the bench. What sort of other ideas do you have there?
Well, so one of the, I don't want to give too much of a cheap plug for our own product, but one of the things that we put into place was for our company to be able to pitch the role literally in the setup process for the video interview. So for an asynchronous, let's say you're going to pick 3 questions. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Not advising that, but let's say those are the 3 questions. But before that, you can add an intro video. So Ben, you could say, hi, welcome to HR Tech Talks. We're very excited to have you as a candidate. Here's a little bit about our company. And the first question is going to be, tell me a little bit more about yourself, whatever that may be. But that's a way for somebody to say, oh, that's actually Ben, even if it's asynchronous, but I get to identify the company with that person. They put some effort into it. Now I feel much more engaged as a candidate. Now I feel much more like they're investing just as much as they're asking me to invest time in this. And that's, same thing. Intro, outros have been huge. And I think it can be used in twofold. I think it could be the president, CEO of the company, sort of as a pitch, which is great, or the hiring manager just saying, hi, this is our team. Here's a little bit about it, which can go either way and work really, really well.
So that was the other research we had on hand that we did about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago now, where we actually asked candidates what kind of video they want to see in the hiring process. Because all the companies that I know, and I've been one of them, so I'll raise my hand and admit to this. You spend all this time and effort and money making this really polished, beautiful video. Here's our corporate culture, and here's our brand. Here's who we are as a company. The candidates, when they ranked the things they want to see, that was dead last. The number one thing they wanted to see was a coworker or a hiring manager talking about, hey, to be great on this team, you've got to be really good at X. Or to succeed in this job, we need someone that can do Y. And that just sets them up. Right.
And exactly. And it makes it like same thing with like the videos. They don't have to be fully studio grade. It can be a Zoom call of like this recording. Obviously, you're going to look way better than I am. But like literally this recording to say, my name's Matt. I'm excited to have you as a candidate. It just makes such a much more intimate, I guess, sort of candidate experience that allows the candidate to say, oh, they're putting in time, energy, effort. That's the CEO or that's the hiring manager. I now have a little bit more vested interest in this whole thing, which I think is super. I mean, I think it's hard to quantify how important that is.
Yes. Well, they're willing to trade polish for authenticity. Right?
100%. Yeah, that's the word. Authentic piece of it. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Goodness gracious. All right. I'm so glad you mentioned that piece of it, because I had forgotten about that. I wanted to come back to it because, number one, research nerd over here, but also because that's a chance for us to respond back. Candidates are saying, I want to see this. And an employer that says, yeah, but I'm going to give you what I want to give you. You're missing a chance to connect with someone, to put a few, as Matt was saying a minute ago, put a human face on this. You put a really human connection in there for that candidate. So it doesn't feel like we're doing this video interview asynchronous to keep you at arm's length. No, it's a chance for us to really get to know you and make sure that this is the right fit for both of us before we go any further, so we don't waste your time and don't waste our time. Like there's a different connotation to, I'm just doing this to make sure that no one talks to you because we don't want to put up with you. You're human.
It's spot on. That's exactly right.
Okay. So we've got just a minute or two left here. If someone wants to learn more about Wedge, the work that you and the team are doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So Wedge specifically, wedgehr.com. Find us. We're on a lot of different socials. I'm pretty loud and obnoxious on LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out to me, find me at Matt Baxter. My email's matt@wedgehr.com as well too. But happy to have anybody on our team. Happy to connect myself. So we'd love to connect and, teach or be helpful, or we can make introductions as well too in the space. We're happy to.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I know when you mentioned earlier, this isn't just about here's the product, go get it. It's you got a question. Everybody's had questions in the last year, how to do something new or something different. And so it's great to hear that perspective of, I just want to teach and help and guide. And oh, by the way, if you need something, we're here, but I just want to, just to help. That's awesome. Yep. So I'll make sure that your name, your profile, and Wedge's profile are both linked here in the LinkedIn show notes to the episode. So if one just click right over beside the video, and you can go right over and say, hey, Matt, saw you on the show. You're my new favorite person, all that stuff that you're going to tell him.
I don't know about that. Ben's my new favorite person, of course.
Matt, I really appreciate you spending some time with us, though, and sharing your passion for this space. From the landscaping background or not, you know what you're doing, and you're there to serve. And it's so exciting for me to hear and to see the great work that you and the team are doing.
That's awesome, Ben. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. To everybody else out there, thank you so much for joining us for HR Tech Talks today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Lots of energy and lots of excitement. And as you could tell, I'm pumped about this topic, not just because of the research and everything else, but because this is a chance for us to really connect with people. I keep hearing from recruiting leaders and HR leaders saying, how do we find people? How do we connect with people? How do we create a better experience there? How about you create a human experience? How about that? All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week, and look forward to catching you next time on HR Tech Talk.